short, there may be a few hours, but they represent in the life of an organization, indeed the life of the individuals in an organization, a significant new transition. And that's what's happening today. I believe we are launching, and I say that with the knowledge, just had a first grandson a week ago, and so I'm thinking starting a new life at Middle Georgia State, because we are indebted to the support of the Jennings family for this first ever inaugural Distinguished Lecture. The Jennings Family Lecture Series has been established through the generous support of Mrs. Janelle Jennings and her family. Born in Terrell County, Georgia, Janelle received her early education in Dawson, Georgia. She's a graduate of Agnes Scott College and Emory Law School. And she married William Mansfield Jennings, Jr. of Hawkinsville. After his service in the U.S. Navy, they moved to Hawkinsville, where he became CEO of the family business. That was the Hawkinsville Telephone Company. And just last week, I was down at their offices, and they have the most amazing collection of phone directories, something that anyone under the age of 40 wouldn't even be familiar with a phone directory. But phone directories from the 1920s and 30s. And, you know, they're so thin, you know, about 5 people had a phone back at that time. So we're really thinking on the communication and connectivity theme this evening. Later, that became an independent company that expanded to being ComSouth Telecommunications. And Janelle also established her law firm, which was named Jennings & Associates. They have 2 children, Mance, or W. Mansfield Jennings III, who is with us this evening. Mance, welcome. And Meredith Ann Jennings, who cannot be with us. And wonderful grandchildren. I'm going to get it wrong, grandkids, as to which one's here. But Andrew Jennings McDaniel and triplet granddaughters of Jenny, Kate, and Liza. And I'm sure you know which one's which. I don't. Both Mansfield and Janelle have been incredibly supportive of higher education generally. And that, to me, as a president of an institution, I also represent a profession that wants to see learning and the role of higher education in all its many different forms, and wants to encourage the strength of many different institutions. We don't need to be partisan, we need to be partners in higher education. So her husband Mansfield served on the Georgia Board of Regents, while Janelle served on the Central Georgia Technical College Board in Warner Robins, and currently she serves on the board for Mercer University and the Mercer McDuffie Center for Strings. So I'm sure the Chancellor of Mercer University, who's here this evening, is proud of what you do, not only for Middle Georgia State, but for Mercer University. Janelle's commitment to education and community engagement is inspiring, because of her support and the family's support for what we're starting tonight. This newly established annual event will bring together thought leaders, innovators, and scholars from various fields in the future as well as tonight to share insights and foster dialogue on pressing issues of our time and our century. As we embark on this new journey, as we launch this, I encourage each of us to reflect on how we will be partners in that process of learning, and how we can use events like this to go back into our communities and our professions with a new perspective on the opportunities. It is through those exchanges that we can broaden our perspective, we can challenge our assumptions, we can work to create a better future, and at a time of great misinformation, hold on to those kernels of where knowledge is actually virtuous as well as invaluable. Virtuous as well as invaluable. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Janelle, to Mance, to the family, for their generosity in endowing this lecture series. It will give us for, I can never say this word, but I'll have a go, in perpetuity. Did I get it right? I'm pleased if I did. And Janelle, as a very, very small gesture of our appreciation, they're making me have to work for this. Please expect these on me. And so we reach the point where we can move to the lecture, to the thought process of this evening. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker of this first inaugural Jennings Distinguished Lecture. We are honored to have with us tonight Mr. Matthew Stepka, who will be delivering the lecture. And to those of you who may have seen, or it's up there at the moment, his lecture is entitled How AI, and for those, I think everyone in the room knows it means artificial intelligence, but if you didn't, now you do, how AI is transforming education and the human experience, both of which are central to this university. Mr. Stepka is the founder and managing partner of Machina Ventures, an early-stage investment fund focused on enlightened AI that amplifies our humanity. He is also a lecturer at the Haas School of Business in the University of California, Berkeley, and a director on the board of Korea, which is a leading cyber safety company that protects children. Previously, he was Vice President of Business Operations and Strategy at Google, where he led and incubated strategic initiatives, especially mission-driven projects with high social impact. Over his 9 years with the company, he led efforts ranging from expanding internet access, developing clean energy, and strengthening freedom of expression and democracy, to extending Google's footprint in emerging markets and especially in Africa. Prior to joining Google, he was Vice President of Pharmacy for Drugstore.com, and prior to that, Chief Operating Officer of WorldRes, a leading online hotel reservation network. He was also a management consultant with McKinsey & Company, working in the healthcare and technology sectors. In addition, he co-founded CyberJava, one of the first internet cafes in the United States. With great pleasure, and I would be remiss, absolutely remiss, not to mention he also serves on the board of trustees of our much loved and respected Knight Foundation, and has previously served on the board of the World Affairs Council of America and is an inaugural Disruptor Foundation Fellow. He holds a Juris Doctorate from the University of California, Los Angeles School of Law, and my wife is from LA, so she's with the grandbaby, but she would love to be here tonight, and is an inactive member of the State Bar of California. He has a bachelor's degree in computer engineering and management from Case Western Reserve University. It's been really wonderful getting to meet Matthew, getting to talk with him, and I know tonight he will help really launch this rather well. It is with great pleasure and honor I introduce to you Mr. Matthew Stepka. Matthew.
Thank you, President Blake, with the very touching introduction. And I'm glad CyberJava still made my bio. Started at the first internet cafe on the west coast of America because my college buddies were all engineers and we loved coffee and we loved the internet. We thought, yes, let's start an internet cafe versus starting an internet business. That probably would have been smarter back then. But thank you for the introduction. It is a real pleasure and honor to be here at MGA and to kick off the Jennings Family's Lecture Series. It really is an honor. And thank you. It's been a pleasure to meet you as well. So let me start with some broad strokes about the topic of artificial intelligence in education. And I think it's pretty safe to say at this point that AI is a pretty different kind of technology. And it's like to have a very profound effect on almost every part of our lives in the future, if not already today. And I think it's important to think it's not like the internet, it's not like mobile phones, it's much bigger than that. It's going to be much more pervasive. The advent of AI has been equated to the discovery of fire and electricity by some. And I think that's not too much of hyperbole. In the context of AI in education, this could not be more true. AI will enable the personalized, adaptive, and engaging education at scale. And this will have a lot of impact for the world and for the next generation for sure. Something only available to the wealthy and privileged before, this idea of having personalized tutoring, but now we can do that at scale. But because of its broad power and application, it's important for us to make sure we don't leave it to the geeks to run it. It's just not, it's too important. We must all have some agency here in AI. It's important that everybody understands, at least at some level, how does it work? What are its capabilities and what's its weaknesses, what's its limitations? And that's why I really advocate for AI literacy. This whole idea about how we work with bots and becoming really essentially part of our job as educators to learn that and be part of our lexicon as much as reading and writing and maybe mathematics. So what are the broader implications for AI for humanity? Well, let me just be clear, to be transparent. I am an optimist about AI. I think on that basis, AI will be a good thing for humanity. I think it will be good for education. But I'm not going to be dismissive of the concerns, of potential risk for harm or negative consequences, especially it can be misused. Okay, let's jump in real quick on the current state of AI. So, if indulge me a little bit, I want to make sure we have at least some grounding. We're at the same level about what is AI, how does it work, why is it different today. We'll talk a little bit about AI applications and what the key ones are. And then we'll go into the value of this AI literacy I talked about. And finally, we'll talk about the implications more broadly. And hopefully we can continue that conversation as we go on. So first we'll talk about AI itself. So this is a picture of John McCarthy. He's a guy who coined the term back almost 70 years ago. So it's been around for a long time. AI is not a new field of study. I actually took my first AI course back in the late 80s, back when it was mostly a research project. And as he would joke about it, as soon as something started working, we stopped calling it AI. AI was a thing that didn't work. It was a dysfunction label. And it was true. I mean, and as soon as something worked, we stopped calling it AI. So for example, driving directions was considered an AI problem, but now that it works, we don't call it AI anymore. We just take it for granted. But it's an interesting aspect about AI. But then eventually they start working. Around the 90s, we had expert systems, kind of worked, but didn't really work very well. And then again, around 2012 was a big breakthrough where machine learning started working. Well, why did it start working? Why is it working today? Why are we having this conversation? Because I'll tell you, 20 years ago, we wouldn't be. And the key thing why it's relevant, one thing is, well, first of all, we had to expect that because of science fiction, everybody has wildly divergent expectations about AI. Either it's going to be terrible or it's going to be wonderful, which is a lot to deal with a technology. The other thing is that it requires incredibly large computational scale. And that really wasn't available until more recently because of Moore's law, and we'll talk about that more. And I'll call it the alchemy of algorithms. So it is not a clear science when you try to get an algorithm to work well for a specific problem. Usually it's a mixture of different algorithms and approaches together that make it work. And then the other part, which is the explosion of digitalized data. That data feeds these learning systems. We don't program these systems, they learn. And they learn through data, through examples, kind of like how children learn how to do things through many times examples. And the last part about AI, which is different, is that it's a black box for some. And some approaches, you don't know why it's coming up with the answer it comes up with, and it's hard to dig into it, and there's a lot of uncertainties around it, and some aspects which are kind of unsettling. We're not used to computers being so vague or unpredictable. So a little bit about the divergent expectations. I already mentioned, obviously everybody knows this image of what AI can do to us, and some really smart people are very afraid of AI. Stephen Hawking, when he was alive, said it's an existential threat potentially for humanity. And it's really hard for me to argue with really smart people, but I will tell you I'm not as worried about that, at least not today. But I will say on the other side, of course, a lot of people think AI will solve all of our problems. It's going to be this beautiful future where AI will be our best friends and we'll have to never worry about anything again and we'll all live forever. So we have this very broad spectrum of beliefs. And at Google, we had Ray Kurzweil, who kept saying that tomorrow we'll have AGI, general intelligence, and we won't have to worry about any more problems anymore. Or people like Peter Diamandis, who basically say we'll have infinite abundance of everything, so don't worry about anything. And then you have people like Elon Musk saying AI will kill us in our sleep. By the way, I'm investing in AI a lot, so I don't know what he really thinks. So he's in the middle, I guess, but or on both sides. Anyway, so that's one thing, that's a background on AI you got to deal with. The second thing is that scale really matters. Here's a picture of Garry Kasparov, 1996, the first chess grandmaster to lose to a computer. And Deep Blue was a computer program built by IBM back then. It was essentially a supercomputer. At the time, it was like we were throwing everything we could at it. And it was just brute force, overwhelming him. And believe it or not, chess is a relatively easy problem to solve. I mean, to me, it's not that good. I'm not very good at chess. But it is actually a relative finite number of moves. And if you just look at every possible move, you can actually outsmart a human pretty well. And that's him looking very unhappy. He went through a lot of depression since then after that. But Moore's law allowed us to have the computational capability to actually do this. And that's a big part of why this suddenly started working. Like when I started studying AI, there were all these great theoretical mathematical ideas like artificial neural nets, but they didn't really work because we couldn't do them in the real world. So flash forward about another 30 years, a Google company called DeepMind, which was bought from the UK, they came up with an approach to actually beat the Go Grandmaster. Now, Go is a much simpler game on appearance, but it actually ends up with almost an infinite number of moves. So you can't just throw mass of computational power at it. You had to be smarter with different algorithms. So the algorithms they came up with all these competing algorithms together, in confluence, they came up with a winning strategy. And a few years later, this Attention is All You Need paper was published by some Google folks and other folks. It was actually one of the last times that there was a lot of open discussion about new developments in technology and AI. And that was actually the genesis for generative AI. But keep in mind, 5 years later. So the idea came out for Attention, and then 5 years later we have things like ChatGPT. So it takes some time to actually make it happen. And the whole idea here was, the big insight was, the same way human beings don't look at everything all the time, don't think about everything all the time, we focus on different parts of things. Doing that mathematically in the model allows you to actually get much more power. Of course, these models became much larger and became much more effective, and they could do parallelized processing as well. So this is a good, big innovation in the algorithm itself led to where we are today. And this fourth part about data, clearly data is necessary if you're doing a learning system. The more data you have, the better data you have, the more chance you have for getting better results as well. And I mean, The Economist a few years ago said, hey, is data the petroleum of the 21st century? To some degree, that's true. And a lot of startups I look at to invest in them, one of the first questions they ask is your data different? Is it proprietary data, or are you just using the same data everybody else has? And the last part, this black box part, is kind of interesting because it's a little confusing for some people. Some people think of AI as a black box in general, but once you get inside the hood, it's not magic. It's not like we don't know what's happening. It's just that what's happening is not explainable to humans. So if you have inputs and you have an AI doing some work and an output comes out and gives you an output, an answer, it's not that we can't figure out the answer. If you look inside the box, we'll see something happening. It's not magically happening, but it doesn't really explain to you the why in most cases. So there's lots of aspects about AI which is kind of a little unsettling, a little different. So it works in probabilities, not certainties. You may have heard the term emergent behaviors, where it has certain behaviors where are not expected. Sometimes that could be helpful. It can have emergent behaviors which are strategies you didn't tell it. But this lack of explainability is a big challenge. It's also non-deterministic, which means because of the approach, it uses randomness to do the training models. It'll sometimes have different results if you give it the same data over and over again. And that unpredictability, again, feels more like people. All these things are true about people, by the way. If you ask a person why they did something, they'll tell you, but you may not believe it. It's always kind of a complicated thing. So AI is more like people, and we're not used to that. We're used to AI being more like computers. Of course, now it does hallucinations, which means it fills in the gaps when it doesn't know what to do. It's like a good management consultant. So if you think about what is AI doing when it understands something, I think we use lots of metaphors in AI, and the danger of those metaphors is that people run with them as if they're real. So when I say AI is reading a paper, or it understands something, or it feels my pain, it doesn't do any of those things. It's just regurgitating data from other data using an algorithm. It's just mathematics that has the appearance, it mimics those things. And it's really important that people, this is part of the AI literacy, it's really important to know that and remember that anytime you're working with an AI, it's not really understanding those things, it's just mimicking understanding. So it can read a New Yorker magazine, a cartoon, and it can tell you what's going on in the cartoon, it can tell you why it's funny even. But it doesn't really understand humor? Probably not. In fact, if you ask it to do a joke, usually it's funny because you're laughing at it, not at the joke. It's not really good at doing humor on its own. Because it doesn't understand the human experience of why things are funny. And the same thing about technical rules. You can give it an IRS document like I did, and I asked this software called Humata, you can upload a document and ask a bunch of questions of the document. So I asked, can I deduct this? Can I do that? And it's pretty accurate, about 80, 90% accurate. However, you wouldn't want to file your taxes based on that. You probably want to have your accountant look at the results. So it helps, but it's not precise enough yet to get there. Okay, that's a quick state of AI. So let's talk about education applications. So I'm not an expert in education, but at a very broad stroke, education has evolved a lot since ancient times. I guess that's a fair statement to say. But if you think about ancient times, you had basically tutoring, one-on-one tutoring, like you have Aristotle tutoring Alexander the Great, that kind of thing, right? And that was a very effective way to learn something, and also very rewarding on both sides for the people, for the tutor as well as the student. But of course, even back then, there was resistance to new technology. This thing called writing that Socrates felt was an abomination was offering the pupils the appearance of wisdom, not true wisdom. It sounds like he's talking about AI, which is basically this mimicry of AI, this mimicry of wisdom, not true wisdom. But the reality is, this is a great model if you can afford it. And back then, of course, very few people could afford to have one-on-one tutoring. So what we do, now as the industrial age came, we kind of scaled up. We do rather than a one-to-one model, we go to a one-to-many model. So now we have lots of students with a few teachers. And that works. It's pretty good. It serves us well. It meant that a lot of people can then get access to education. But the problem is it leaves people behind. If you don't learn the way the teacher is teaching, you have to move on. And so that, for a lot of people who have learning disabilities or are very gifted, you might get bored or overwhelmed. So for a lot of people, it's not perfect, but it definitely helped more than hurt, I guess. But the key thing here is that AI can help us do this at scale now. We can go back to the one-on-one tutoring model, but we can do it at scale, cheaply, in a way that can make it available to more people. So I think that's a very good positive part of it. So let me go through an example. You probably have heard of Khan Academy. So Khan Academy was started by Sal Khan, who gave a talk on AI recently and has also written a great book about this topic as well. And he basically was giving tutoring to his nieces and nephews on math and science because they were struggling, and he's a smart guy. And after a while, he said, okay, well, let me put them in videos on YouTube, because he had too many nieces and nephews, I guess. And they started liking it and sharing with their friends, and before long, now he has over 165 million people have used his students, mostly young folks, using his videos, and lots of volunteer teachers, hundreds of volunteer teachers as well. So it's a great thing. He also created a nonprofit. It could have been a very profitable company, probably. And then recently, this year, he launched Khanmigo, which I still find it hard to say that properly, but I'm going to say Khanmigo. And it's basically a chatbot tutor that you can interact with as if it was a tutor person. Again, you can ask it questions, and it'll come back and it'll give you some quizzes, see how you're doing. If you're not doing well, it'll ask you to explain it. It can go walk you through. So it's a Q&A thing like a tutor would do. And I think, at the very least, and these are some quotes from him, AI will definitely help, at least with the administrative part of teaching, administrative part of education. 10 to 15 hours he estimates a teacher spend on administrative activities that really aren't adding a lot of value. And frankly, as a teacher myself, it's not the best part of teaching. I'd rather spend more time with students. So generative AI can do a lot of that stuff, and really it doesn't make the experience worse. It probably will make it better. And then at the same time, though, I think the higher level stuff, it will actually it'll extend and amplify human tutors. So it'll let you, when you're not available, they can be there. If you don't speak the language that person feels comfortable in, it can do that for you. It makes you a superhuman, basically. And on the teacher side, the same thing with the student. The students can use these tools very tailored to them and working for them. So this comes down to personalized learning. This is not a new concept, but AI makes it work. So it can customize curriculum based on your goals, your pace and style, and your preferences. So think of it as basically saying you have a tailored curriculum based on what you need and how you like to work. Even your preferences. So maybe it could be your language or whatever medium you like to work in. A related topic is adaptive learning and automatic feedback. So this idea here is more like a real-time part of that. So if you think of the broader part being personalized learning, adaptive learning is real-time. You look at the performance of the student, and you take that into account to say, hey, you knew this, but you didn't seem to know this, so let's go deeper on that piece here, and helps that person find out what they don't know. So that real-time part of it is really important, and the performance part is really important. But this is performance in a different way. I mean, typically when people think about performance in education, everybody gets really nervous and they think about the grade they get and how both the stress and the shame related to what grade you got and the ranking, all those things you have to deal with education, which doesn't necessarily always help us. But it does actually, you do need to get that feedback. But that feedback can now be used to actually help you do a better job. So we can instantly change the intensity, one, to keep you excited so you're not bored or you're not being overwhelmed. And at the same time, it can adapt it so that you look at feedback in a very different way. So now rather than being afraid of it, you can be much more, you can embrace it. And you want to know what you don't know. If I don't know something, I want to learn it. If you have that attitude, that changes the way you look at that feedback. It also addresses Ben Bloom's 2 sigma problem, which you may have heard about before, which is kind of a strange way of saying it. To me, it should be called 2 sigma opportunity. It's basically saying that, if you get a 70% on a grade, and if you get a lot of tutoring, you can actually get that 2 sigmas better. Typically, it means most people can learn to master any subject if they just get that help. And that's the thing. The human brain is an amazing thing. You just give it time or help and keep trying different approaches. So an AI working this way can actually overcome that and make most people master topics rather than just move on, which is a very strange way of thinking about education that we do today. So the third part is I call it assisted tutoring. And this is basically a simulation of what a tutor does. So it's an interaction. It's more like a UI for AI and education. And it's, you think about chatbots is the most natural way to think about it. But I mostly think about it in terms of how it amplifies existing tutors. I don't think it necessarily replace them. It might replace them at times if a person's not available, or if it's maybe a very remote place, or a language they don't speak, all those kinds of things. But I do think in the end, there's still going to be humans as part of the process. But they're always available and they're infinitely patient. And I think they can also do different kinds of working with people that, again, works for different situations. So, as a teacher, we all have our own styles, the way we work, our own jokes, which after a while get kind of old, but our styles that work with some students and not other students. Well, this allows you to kind of modify those styles and approaches that work with different students in their own way. There are lots of companies going after this. I started going my own research recently on this. There are many companies that are doing these chatbots that are working with students. Almost every education software has some sort of chatbot tutor. Google has their own Socratic one. Dreambox has, I think, over 6 million students using their system. Nerdy is also one of the biggest bases. They have like 3,000 courses that you can do with their work. These are a few examples. So what does this mean for higher education? Because obviously, besides just, the adaptive and personalized education, higher education has some special needs. Probably number one is going to be education. That's our research. It'll accelerate research already. Already that's being used today. If you're doing research, you're using AI today already. If you're doing legal research or scientific research, you'll use it to find things and make connections that the human brain just has missed. The beauty of AI is it can do a massive amount of data. It can look at things and find things that we don't know, we didn't see. And if you think about AI, it's artificial intelligence. It's just a different intelligence. Humans have their way of seeing things. We have our own biases and our own blind spots. And AI has its own biases and blind spots. So together we'll have a better outcome, but it'll catch things that we have missed otherwise. In research, that's fantastic. It can also be used to enhance learning experiences like simulations. So you can do more research or do more learning in context, like rather than going to a lab, you can do it in a simulation with AI, which makes it a lot more faster to learn and probably easier too. Academic integrity is a little bit of a double-edged sword. Definitely, it's pretty important in terms of if we can use AI to obviously make sure that we have done our homework and we've done sourcing properly. Also, we can use it for detecting plagiarism. Of course, it can be used to create plagiarism. So it is a little bit of and we'll talk about that more on the negative side. It can be used for helping people do their career planning, career services at universities, and I think even just general administrative functions, including helping at least some of the heavy lifting of the admissions process. Actually, one of the students today asked me this question about how it will affect admissions if everybody could be writing their articles, writing their admissions essays using ChatGPT. This is going to be hard. First, it'll be hard to detect it. But I think that will probably require that colleges look at different indicators of success within the university and their broader life. So what's a good framework to think about what's going to happen for education? This is one I use often. It's from Bain and Company. It's a pretty simple framework. There's a level of disruption over time. And this will be used for any kind of new technology entering a space and what happens. So at the very least, every industry, and this is a pretty safe thing to say, every industry, every field will use AI to optimize what they do. What that means is you're going to just do the same thing you're doing, just do it better, faster, cheaper. So just make it more efficient, and that's going to be really fantastic. McKinsey estimates that will be like $15 trillion of value, and that's the equivalent of the whole German economy. So it's going to be a lot of value created for the economy. It'll be a good thing overall. Obviously, there are implications for that, how fast it happens, and what it may displace people. There's no question about those are real issues associated with that. But long term, that creation of value is going to be a big driver for the economy. And I think for education, it's important too. We all have limited resources. We have less resources wasted on something we don't care about, rather put those resources into something which is more valuable. Transformation is a little bit different. So transformation is saying you're still doing the same function, you're just going to do it a very different way. So you're not going to do it the same way you did it before. And this is where I think we'll see a lot of stuff happening with AI in education. So think about the cobot concept. Having AI alongside with a professional, whatever the profession is, if you're a doctor, a lawyer, or an educator, you're going to have AI next to you. And I'll tell you, at some point pretty soon, you're not going to want to go to a doctor or a lawyer or an educator who doesn't use AI. Because you want to make sure they know, you want to get the best of what they can do. And that will help them make sure they don't make mistakes, make sure they thought through all the possibilities. And it'll be a good cobot for them, a partnership with them to have it done. You probably don't want to go with an AI only, because that AI will not have the human experience or all the things you're looking for in education. And same thing with a doctor. They won't have the empathy, understanding that you want. You still want to have a person involved in the process. Reinvention on the extreme, there are fewer examples of this. And probably the best example is a self-driving car, where you have, which is going to reinvent the transportation industry for sure. And I would say even then, it's really not 100% no humans involved. There's still humans overlooking the process that can intervene in corner cases when the cars get stuck. So really, there's still some human intervention. It's just more and more attenuated. Okay, going kind of fast. We'll move into the value of AI literacy a little bit. So what is AI literacy, and what do I mean by that, and why is it important? Well, at the very least, the obvious stuff that you're probably thinking about when you think about AI literacy, you're thinking about, okay, a bunch of geeks and engineers building stuff. Yeah, of course, that's the core of what there's definitely be a lot of people, an increasing number of people who will be programming AI tools and systems. But also be people on the policy side thinking through the policy implications of these tools. So the broad ecosystem work that needs to be done, there'll be a lot of people doing that. But there'll be a lot more people who'll be adapting those tools to real-world problems. And understanding the best of what the tools can offer and how they work, both their strengths and weaknesses, and also understanding the detailed problem we're trying to solve and how to frame that problem is really important. So these are folks who are going to be doing a lot of work in that area. This requires a lot of problem-solving skills, having some technical understanding, but also more important, having that domain expertise as well. And then much bigger pie, these are not to scale, but a bigger pie is going to be the interaction with AI, and that's pretty much going to be everybody. You're already interacting with AI, of course, today. If you use Google or anything online, you're using AI today already. So it's important to be a smart user and a smart creator. You need to understand the limitations of what you're looking at. You have to have good critical thinking, and we have to teach those critical thinking skills. So when you see something like an election night, and if you see something on election night, you might want to think twice before reacting to it, because you never know. Maybe AI generated that. I want to make sure it's real before I react to it. Maybe do some cross-checking. If you're a journalist, you're going to make sure you receive something. You want to make sure you verify that that's a real thing, and maybe corroborate that with other sources. So having that kind of critical thinking, that's a big part of the education process going forward. But also understanding what the power of AI. How do I use AI? AI is the medium of the future. We're going to start with AI. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to AI, sit down, and have you help it through a problem or thought, any kind of task you have. So how do machines become intelligent? And I'm going to go through this very high level, and hopefully not too fast, view of how machines go through the machine learning process. The most important thing, and the reason why I bring it up is I think everybody has to think about, well, what role do I play in this? Or why do I need to know about this? Well, because it's important for non-technical people to have a seat at the table at a lot of these different stages, and more so others and others. But the first one is the data set creation and labeling. This means collecting a bunch of data and feeding it into the AI to learn on. And you can say, well, that's great, but what data do you include? What data do you exclude? Do you clean up that data? How do you clean the data up? All those decisions you make are really important. I mean, a simple example would be, say you're making an AI to do diagnosis for something. Well, the data you bring in there, if there's some fields missing in that data, how do you treat that? If someone doesn't answer a question about they're a smoker or not, does that mean they're not a smoker? Does that mean they are a smoker? Or how do you interpret that? Well, that requires maybe a little human understanding. Or if you ask a question, that's this fun with doctors, how many drinks per week do you have? They always times that by 2. Whatever number you give them, they times it by 2 because they don't believe that number. So that's their own internal domain expertise on that. But that's something that doctors know because they've had this experience before. They know. So I do think it's important that people have a table at stake for that part of the process. The next part is you have to choose what kind of model you want, and then how do you configure it. Again, it sounds very technical. It sounds like, why would I be involved with that? Well, explainability is a good example. So right now, there are AI systems being used today in some jurisdictions that judges are using to decide how long you should be sentenced to jail or whether you should get bail or not. Now, I think depending on which one they use, I'd probably want to know, if I was on the other side of that, I want to know, wait, why'd you give me 5 years and that guy 10? I mean, I want to know those questions. And you can't cross-examine some models. If you open up the model, it's just a bunch of numbers. It won't tell you the why, and I can't cross-examine it. So I think there are some kinds of models, that's choice of model, can let you do that or not let you do that. Some kinds of models can be cross-examined. Some models can tell you, oh yeah, the reason why, here's the decision tree of why I decided that answer versus that answer. So your choice here is very important. And of course, the model creation part, this is the part you probably not worry about. This is the part that's mostly mathematics just working. It just churns through the data, creates the model, and then this next part, you evaluate that model. You gotta look at it and say, well, wait, how does this, does it actually answer the question with enough certainty that I'm okay with it? If it's doing diagnosis, does the diagnosis have too many false positives? And if that's a real problem, should I tune it again to be more towards false negatives? And those are decisions you can make as a business person or it's a non-technical part. In the end, you birth a little model. and then it goes out in the real world, and it interacts with the real world, and you can get data from afterwards, and you can see how to do. So that's very similar to the education process, just now you're working with bots instead of people. So in the model selection part, I mean, you guys probably heard about artificial neural networks, which are basically very loosely, and I say very, on the human brain. So rather than having neurons, we have nodes. Instead of synapses, we have these edges, these connections. But you see, it's a very simplified view of what a brain does. And it also, by the way, it tends to be just one direction. Your brain does not do one direction, it goes back both ways, and the connections everywhere. It's a big mess, but somehow consciousness emerges from all that. So let me go through an example just to give you an idea how this works. So say you just want to have a model that's going to go and read handwritten numbers and figure out which one it is. Is it number 3? I think we can all do that pretty well, right? So you have these scanned in images, 28 by 28 dots. So you have 784 dots. Those are your inputs. You have a bunch of stuff holding out in the middle. And on the other side, you need 0 to 9. So you have 10 possible outcomes, right? Well, that big part in the middle, that's a big question. How you decide how many layers, how big are the layers? It's kind of an arbitrary thing. Well, this example has 2 layers. There's 16 nodes each. So this is my little model, my little brain I'm creating. And if you add up all the numbers, each of those lines has got a weight. Each of those dots, those nodes has a weight. And you add up those numbers, it's about 13,000 parameters. That's what that means. When you hear this model has so many parameters, that's what that means. That's how big the model is. And what you're doing is when you create the model, when you train the model, you're just getting the numbers for those parameters. And every time you give it an example, it updates those numbers just ever so slightly. And eventually you have a stable answer where it keeps giving relatively good answers. You're okay with the answers. But the problem is now the models are up to 1 trillion parameters. They're gigantic. They're overwhelmingly large. You can't get your head around how large they are. And so it's important to think about, well, how do I get involved in that process? But I think it's important to understand that even at some level, it's all very straightforward. It's all very simple. It's just at very large scale. Okay, that's enough on literacy, but you get the idea. So let's take a really broad step back now on the implications of AI and a little bit of summary as well about education. So here's like Aristotle with his little bot assistant. So again, I think the most important, exciting thing for AI in education is the ability to personalize and to be adaptive learning at scale. And this will be really important for the world. I think it'll make it available to a lot more people. And a lot of people who have been left behind and frustrated by education can now be enabled. I saw this in Africa with the internet. People were just in the middle of nowhere where you think they have no access to the internet, but somehow they got access to the internet, they learned how to program, and now they've educated themselves. It's just so heartwarming to see that. All these minds will be freed up by these kinds of things. We'll get better outcomes as well because we'll focus on getting the best of mastering subjects rather than just ranking someone or labeling them with a letter or grade or that kind of thing. So many people get that reaction to that kind of being labeled as a number, or a number assigned to you or a letter assigned to you, and that becomes your identity. Broader access, I think, is a net result of all this. Research and analysis I mentioned already as well. And I think overall it'll make it much more efficient and productive, which will free up more resources to do more things in education. So on the concern side, this is kind of our scary robot teacher here. I think the lack of humanity is probably the biggest it's a hard one to get your head around exactly, but you realize that education is at the heart of it a human experience, both from the teacher's perspective and the student. The teacher gets a lot of value out of it as much as the student does. The teacher is learning as well as the student's learning. And this exchange between generations often is really an important process. It also involves things that really hard to put into a robot, and that is this idea of values and also true empathy. Again, when you think if you think an AI has empathy towards you, just remind yourself it actually doesn't have empathy. It's mimicking that feeling. Now, people do mimic too. We sometimes don't mean it when we say we're sorry, but actually, we also kind of know we can pick up on that that's not true, and we're kind of used to that. The other real risk I think for AI in education is over-reliance. I think the real fear here I have is that people get kind of complacent, and I see this with self-driving cars. Early on, when Google was experimenting with self-driving cars, we had drivers behind the wheel while the car was being self-driven, but they're supposed to pay attention. Of course, people get tired. They start falling asleep at the wheel because they get used to it. They say, well, it seems pretty safe. It hasn't crashed the last time, so I guess it'll probably be fine. And we have a video camera on them as they pass out. And or they'll be playing a video game or watching a movie, all that kind of stuff. People just, frankly, aren't good at staying partially engaged. And if something seems to be working, they'll assume it's okay. Our notion about how many nines we need, how much precision or how much certainty we have to have is very skewed. If you experience something 9 times or 10 times it's working, to you it works perfectly well. But of course, that's not, if your life is on the line like on a car, that's a really bad analysis. You want to have much more data. And I worry that our critical thinking muscle will atrophy as well. People just get more relaxed about it. And this is the part that's more subtle about this. It also will narrow the field of our possibilities. I think if we're looking through the lens of AI as a teacher, to some degree, I think by definition, it has its biases, its blind spots. And over time, you can imagine many generations from now, if we keep doing that over and over, I think it will affect our view of the possibilities of the world. And again, this is part of the same idea about having that filter can limit us long term. Of course, there's the risk of data privacy issues and authorship. I go back to the double-edged sword about plagiarism. I do think in my class, I always tell people, I'm teaching an AI course. Of course, you can use AI for the course. All I ask is that you're completely transparent about it. Tell me what you did, show me what you did, and how much of it was you versus the AI. And if you show me all that, that's fine. And if you have the guts to do the most amazing prompt, and that comes up the whole answer in one prompt, well, I guess you're a great prompt engineer, so go for it. And the last part, which of course for any technology and AI, I think it is going to be true, there will be job loss. There already have been job losses. Some companies have actually been really threatened by AI already, and I think in the education space. And I think this will be a real issue we'll have to deal with. I do think at the same time, if you look at the demographics, especially in the United States, we need more people. We need more help. And so as people are getting older, we're going to need more young folks to teach, and we need to make them more superhuman. If we can take the more mundane part of their jobs away and we can get more out of them, I think that's probably a good thing. But we'll still have to work through that as a society, how to deal with that effect. So the broader implications. Again, I go back to liberating more minds, I think will lead to a better society. I think I'm just very excited about that. I can only feel it only feels like a good thing. More people entering the soup of knowledge and exchanging information has to be a good thing. And having people with superhuman capabilities, doctors who don't make mistakes as much, or lawyers who don't miss things, or educators who don't leave a student behind, all those kinds of things will be fantastic. And I think it will change the speed of thought, as if we need to go faster. There's one thing about this which I do wonder, are we going to reach the limit of what humans can do? But the speed of thought is going to go faster because more people will be able to do things and learn from each other. The speed of development of knowledge will increase. On the other side, this overdependence concern, I think just broadly in tech, not just within education, but I think in general, I do worry that people become overly complacent towards AI, not just in education, and a loss of our humanity, a little bit loss of agency. I think to some degree, if people feel like, oh, AI can just do everything, we'll become like children where the AI just does everything for us without having to think about it. That's not a good outcome. And I do think this narrowing over time, if you think long term, this digital lens that we're looking through could actually lead us to a situation where, in a very subtle way, we'll kind of back ourselves into a very non-human existence. It may be true, like 100 years from now, life will just be unrecognizable. The way people think about it will be unrecognizable. So how do we stop that? I don't have an answer, by the way, if that's what you're hoping for. That one's tough. That's a very subtle thing. So my closing thoughts. I mean, I'm kind of borrowing from Marshall McLuhan here in this one. I mean, he was saying the printing press created the public and the internet created the global village, but will AI create a universal mind? And what I mean by that is bringing together AI and human together into this kind of a woven fabric. I really think that is an opportunity to really take us to the next stage of existence. I'm not worried about them, taking over the world, but I do think we have to think about how do we manage this in a thoughtful way. But I think there's huge possibilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. That was enlightening. We do have time for a question and answer session. AI probably wouldn't have forgot to announce that when we started, but that's my humanity, so I get to contribute. So if we do have questions, we have microphone runners coming around, so if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll bring you a microphone, and right here, Dr. Watt.
How you doing, sir? Thank you so much. This is absolutely amazing. Your last slide brings something rather interesting to my own mind on this. I'm a big fan of AI, but the people who programmed AI have created their inherent biases. They were created primarily by Western nations and doesn't include the knowledge outside of those Western nations. So how do we solve the inherent biases in the AI?
Yeah, I think this is true about the internet. When I was at Google, we had a program that we started about languages. because I don't know if you realize this, there's about, I think, if I remember the numbers right, about 6,000 languages in the world today. And about half those languages will be gone by the end of the century, if not sooner. And the internet is doing that. It's just mowing over all the languages because there's less value in learning those languages, and it's just not, they're not staying alive. We're trying to help keep those languages at least preserved under glass, if not alive. And I think that's the same, AI will make that worse, to your right. It'll create a convergence. And when I talk about having a universal mind, that convergence has a double edge. I mean, it makes it less interesting. And the beauty of the world is that it has this richness, and all these different cultures and different ways of thinking and so forth. And if we lose that and the same thing true about languages, we'll lose a lot. The example, you probably heard this before, I've been told it's not exactly right, but the Eskimos had like 60 words for snow or something like that. But, and that will be lost if that language is lost, that kind of thing. I think the answer is I don't know, because it's a trade-off. The value, the efficiency of having this communication together and working together is so high, but it comes at a loss of richness. We have to find ways to keep that richness, and it's realizing it's a threat. So that's my only answer. Is we have to have some countervailing forces against it. But we have to be proactive.
Hello, thank you so very much for this conversation. It was very enlightening today. I have two questions. One is who is the we that defines the value and how value is determined and efficiency is determined? And the second question is understanding how do you evaluate or determine competency in these skills that are taught? So after it's done, is AI assisting in the evaluation process, or is there a human process that's involved in helping to identify the competency of the teaching of AI?
Yeah, I think the second question, I think it's a very fair point. I think it was the same thing we struggle with standardized testing. It has, obviously there's biases in that, and it's problematic in lots of ways. And I think that's when we go back to the human touch question. If we only start testing certain things, and that's what we keep cycling on, if that's all we care about, that would be wrong. That would be, that nuance is important. There's lots of softer things we care about. And definitely in some fields, I would think there's going to be a lot less AI. It won't be evaluating like the best ballet dancer or the best violinist or whatever. I think hopefully those things will still retain some in our humanity there as well. But I think there are some areas that are relatively easier to be more objective in the measure and decide that's a good way to build it in. But again, same thing. I think we need to find ways to make sure we don't lose our humanity. That we feed in some human intervention in the loop. That's why I think keep the humans in the loop is very important, so that we don't just kind of, as a lawnmower, just kind of like mow over all those kinds of nuances. It'd be a very kind of a boring future for humanity to be true. And your first question again, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the full. Who the we are?
Yeah, you described the value and efficiency.
Oh yeah.
Who determines or how that defines what's value and what's efficient?
Well, this is interesting, and this is important, I think, for universities and educational institutions to think about really strongly, because they may not be in control of this. The individual actors will do what's in their best interest. So the same way students are using AI right away because they found out, wow, I can save a lot of time, cut and paste. Hey, we all did that. We started with World Book encyclopedias, and then it was Wikipedia. And whatever, so students would definitely take shortcuts where they can, and teachers will say, wow, if I can use these tools, I'm going to use those tools, and it's hard to know they're doing it. So I think setting policies right, educating people properly about it. There are some tools you can do to help detect it and manage it, but I think it's important to be very thoughtful about that, because you're right. Sometimes if we're using a tool to grade papers, if you're an English teacher using it to do that, I think that's probably that's kind of your job. I think you should not be delegating that to an AI, but maybe you might use it to do a quick check to say, hey, is it plagiarism, or maybe to synthesize it to help accelerate your process. That's probably fine, but again, you become over-reliant on that, then I think that would be a danger, and I think that would be not a good use of it. But in the end, it'll be individuals who decide this. And I think the institutions can help set some standards.
Yes. Would you speak to AI and the arts, the creative spirit, music, art, poetry, and the impact of AI? And you speak of the loss of humanity, but I'm concerned about the creative spirit and how it affects, how it interacts with that.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm a amateur artist. My girlfriend is actually a professional artist. We talk about this all the time. And she works with robots and AI and tech a lot. So I think it's a very important question. I do think I'm a mediocre artist. And so for me, it definitely makes being a mediocre artist less helpful. I mean, you're going to use these tools because they can do mediocre art. I don't think AI is really good at doing high art yet. I think it's if it's just doing background images or that kind of thing, it's pretty good at. So I do think some areas it will be challenging, especially commercial art, stuff like that. I think that's definitely true. But even like developing graphics and so forth, a lot of times the results are not good enough to use it. The person still needs to work with it. It just accelerates their work. So I think great artists who are aspiring for greatness, I think will use AI as a great tool. Like if Beethoven was alive today, Beethoven would use AI tools, or Mozart would use these tools because they want to do the best they possibly can do. And they would use these tools to get better and better, and they'd have even more wonderful pieces. But I do think it's challenging if we're like in that space, we might feel like it may take away from us. I think already we see it with imagery, it starts to have a look. You can almost kind of feel like, oh yeah, that's an AI-generated image, because it kind of starts feeling like a certain way. But I do think when it tries to mimic individual artists, there's an economic and intellectual property problem about that. So I do think we have to solve. But we can solve that problem. We can decide how do we, allocate either money or compensation if someone is training an AI on your work, and then you want to make sure that you get compensated for that. That's something we can fix, I think, ultimately. I'm not sure, did I get your question, or? Thank you. Okay.
I mean, I'd like to have more conversation.
Yeah, by the way, this is a topic I'm very near, actually also in music. I'm a musician a little bit, and I love playing around with these tools. But again, because arts and music is such a human part of our existence that it doesn't have a soul, really. It can mimic things. So it's good at like the background stuff. If you want background music in your dentist's office, it probably is going to be pretty good at that. But if you want something which is real that comes from human experience, like the blues or something, it's just not going to do that very well because it doesn't have those experiences. It's never experienced heartbreak. How would it actually do that? But it can mimic it. And one thing I'll tell you is AI is a bit of a mirror on humanity. You start realizing a lot of stuff we do is frankly a lot of, it's pretty much it's pretty trite. It's a lot of cliches. And so if you start realizing all that cliche stuff is kind of easy to do. AI can do that. So it ups all of our game. So you can be up for the challenge or you can be threatened by that. I do think it's, but it doesn't mean that we're replacing good art or great art. That's my opinion. Right. True.
Is it me?
Okay, I'm bracing for the question.
Oh, right. Given that AI is, I'm right here. Given that AI is still in its infancy, and yet it's still requiring so much energy for the data centers to process AI, how does energy keep up with that demand as it grows from infancy into the more juvenile state?
I think it's a very good question. I was expecting this question because I like to consider myself an environmentalist, or I care about the environment. And this was a real issue for cryptocurrencies and blockchain in general. I do feel guilty when I ask ChatGPT some stupid question like where is this drugstore, or what's a good recipe for peanut butter, because you basically realize I just chopped down a tree to ask a stupid question. So I think that is right sizing models to the question will be an issue that we'll have to do more and more. Right now we're in a period of time where we're not really pricing these things out properly. OpenAI is losing money on all this stuff. They actually have revenue, but it doesn't cover their costs, and so people aren't, like myself, I'm not, hey, well, I'll just ask every question, why not? So that will change. The other thing which will happen is we can actually tune these models in ways and use new algorithms focusing on efficiency. So there's a lot we can do along those lines. We know that the upper bound on learning is a lot more efficient. Our human brains consume very little electricity, yet do much more wonderful things than any AI can do today. So we must be missing something. So we know if this was possible, we're down here, and sure, it's taking a lot of energy, but we can make it a lot more efficient to get there, and so it'll learn faster and use a lot of electricity. So efficiency will be, the next few years, you'll see a lot of people talking about how do I make the same model, but do it for half the electricity or computational cycles. Yeah. I'm racing for it.
Going back to that human brain stuff, that human brain, that what it is an inexplicably wonderful pattern matching device that makes all our creativity and all our errors and all our mistakes come from that too. An example I'd give is in math and academically is complex numbers. Imaginary numbers were literally created by a guy who was trying to solve a different problem and came up but had the negative square root of 17 in his computation, which by all the rules and everything we know, you throw that sucker out. That's wrong. That's nothing but an error. You can't have a square root of a negative. Well, he kept his square root of a negative, and it canceled out in the end and didn't make any difference. And so we now have imaginary numbers of square root of -1 and complex numbers that do all this stuff.
Yep.
Will an artificial intelligence, a general artificial intelligence, how will it ever be able to decide when to throw away rules like that just to keep matching patterns?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's why I'm less worried about, do humans still have a place in this whole ecosystem? A good example, anytime there's a big change in, the general framework, what's going on, like when the pandemic happened, all these machine learning models went off a cliff. So Zillow lost over $1 billion because they were buying and selling homes based on their AI models that were predicting what's going to happen. Machine learning is not very good at big discontinuities of the actual framework. And it has no conceptual understanding of what's going on. So in the self-driving car, they call this the paper bag problem. So a paper bag kind of floats across, the view of the screen of the car. Well, we all know what that means. We've seen paper bags. We can even if we haven't seen a paper bag, we can expand anything flowing across our screen. We can think about that and understand what it's about and conceptualize about it and decide whether we need to brake or just go right through it. And for these machines, they don't know how to do that. So they don't have a conceptual model. And to your point, this serendipity of learning, I think many of the biggest innovations were based on serendipity, random connections between two people. And so AI is not really good at that. You could do some randomness and just throw some randomness in there and see what happens. But you may do that for a long time and not get to anything interesting. It's kind of like the monkeys with the typewriters in the room. Yeah, eventually they'll write a sonnet, but you may have to wait a long time. And right now, AI is very slow at getting there. We had a farm of arms, we called it at Google, these robotic arms, a whole room full of these arms, kind of a creepy place in San Francisco. And the arm was just, all these arms just picking objects up from one box into another, trying to learn how to do that, and using machine learning to do that. And we're all excited about this concept. Great, machine learning to teach these guys these arms, into how to do this. And we thought, okay, great, they're approaching human capability. And we plotted out, we realized, yeah, it'll take only about 150 years, and then they'll learn to be as good as a human. Because the machine learning process is so slow. It requires a lot of data. So I think the answer is we got a lot of learning to do ahead of us. And the human brain is the most complicated thing in the world, the most efficient thing in the world. And I think, so we still have a place still ahead of us.
The other side of that question would be if we start using AI for all this stuff, will that part of our brains atrophy?
I mean, that's the part I think we have to constantly tell ourselves. It's like saying, just because you can't take the elevator, you can take the stairs. It's okay. It's probably good sometimes to force yourself to take the stairs. You can't take the elevator, sure, that's easier, but take the stairs. There's a reason why you have legs, use them. Otherwise, you won't have them much longer. So,
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Matthew Stepka, thank you so much. We appreciate everyone's time this evening. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much to the Jennings family for endowing this lectureship. We look forward to it. I think your final point was one of the best. Very simply, use your brain, take the stairs, and we've got a lot of work to do ahead of us, so take a lot of stairs. Thank you all, and have a good evening.